Welcome to Season 3.
And this tradition unlike any other.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Season 3 of the Business Culture Podcast. It's great to have you along again. My name is Rob Arnold, your host, and we've got another great guest lined up for this episode, none other than Jonathan Menteath, the General Manager of the Heritage Club in Mauritius. I've had the fortune of knowing Jonno for quite a few years, and he's had a really interesting career both in South Africa and now obviously abroad in Mauritius as well. We chatted about some key insights relating to people management, understanding different types of cultures, especially contrasting South Africa with Mauritius, and just generally what some of the key lessons have been along the way in that journey that Jonno has had. I hope you take great value from the interview.
I grew up in Durban and started playing golf at about the age of 10, 11. We used to go down to the public course then. It was called Papua, named after Papua Sugolo. And there was another one called Windsor. So those were the two public courses. And you used to put your ball in a little chute and wait your turn to tee off. You know, when your ball got to the bottom of the chute, it was your turn. So that's where my golf started. And I mean, I was a decent sportsman, so the golf bug bit me. And by the age of 15, I think I played my first interprovincial for Natal in the under-18 team. And that was at Paarl, and that was my first exposure to the likes of Charles Swartzel, Richard Sterney. So I'm in that sort of era of golfers.
You've given away your age nice and early there.
Yeah, I hope it's not too old. But yeah, that's really, I mean, I've still got very imprinted memories of that tournament in particular, and seeing that level of golf from those guys. And yeah, the bug really bit from then on, and I wanted to become a professional golfer. But as things go, you need a lot of money to get started in professional golf, or someone backing you. And I didn't particularly have that, so I was kind of relying on my talent mostly. I had a bit of technical coaching in my matric year, but after that, didn't really go for much coaching and tried to give it a go. So I didn't really have a team structure around me, which I've realized post those years is really important, even just for a pro golfer. That support system is very important. So I gave it a bash on the Sunshine Tour School in 2005, made it into the top 50 after the first two rounds, but didn't get into the top 30, which you needed to get into to make it onto the tour. I think I finished 42nd or something like that. And that was my one shot. And then I decided, okay, well, my golf is my passion. Don't necessarily have the funding to keep flogging this thing. So I need to work. So I went to work in golf. I started at Mabalingwe, which changed its name to Zebula while I was there. That was a really interesting place to work. I worked with some interesting characters. That's where I first got to meet Dale Hayes in person, because he used to do a lot of work there. And in those days, he was helping with the marketing. And then my second director there used to work for Rob Selly. And Rob Selly was one of the more prominent South African PGA members. And he hired me to work with him at the River Club in Johannesburg, which is nicknamed the CEO's Club. So I got to meet a lot of high-profile people there. So Cyril Ramaphosa actually interrupted my interview, and Rob had to take a phone call with him while I was being interviewed by Rob. So that's kind of the company that I got to keep there. And I've still got some members who've remained friends with me even until today. And that's also when I got to meet Langley Parents at the River Club. And Lang then asked me to go down and help with the Pinnacle Point Pro Shop, which I did. So I worked with Wayne Crambeck and Jason Totis at Pinnacle Point, and that was just a magnificent golf course. I remember the first time driving the course and just being absolutely blown away by the drama that's out there. I don't even know how they built that course. It must have been such a challenge. But yeah, beautiful place. And then from there, as I started to look to settle down a bit, Mossel Bay was a little bit isolated for me. So I spoke to Lang and I said to him, if anything becomes available in one of the bigger cities, I'd like to go that route. And it wasn't quite a big city, but a bit closer was Arabella. So he sent me down to the Arabella shop to run that and to bring a bit of stability to the retail business there. And then when John Bumstead retired, I took over as the director of golf from John. So I spent the better part of about 5.5 years at Arabella. I used to bring tour groups out from Arabella to Mauritius from time to time. And it was fate, whatever you want to call it. We were meant to be playing at a course called Belmar Plage, which has 2 courses, Links and the Legends. And they happened to be holotining at the time that I was due to bring the Arabella members out to their course. So we changed locations. And at that time, the previous manager had resigned and they were looking to fill the position here. I really wasn't looking for anything, honestly, even though I knew the position was available. But as you said earlier, the stars aligned. And within, I think it was a month and a half, I was living in Mauritius after that trip. So they interviewed me whilst I was on holiday with the Arabella members. And yeah, a month later, I was asked to come and fill the position here. And I'm now in my 7th year of living in Mauritius. We've made a life for ourselves here. We've sold our house in South Africa, bought a house here. My boys, one of them was 3 weeks old when we left South Africa. And my other boy is 4 years old and he was born in Mauritius. So they've spent all of their lives here and we're enjoying the Mauritian lifestyle.
Sure, Jonno, that's an incredible, I suppose, collection of properties and places to have worked at a relatively young age. I wanted to take a few steps back and that time when the sort of playing career was I suppose not going to materialize and you went into the golf, the management space and the operations space. And I'm thinking more for the likes of the guys going into that space now who are finding their feet. In reflection and looking back in those early years, what were some of the things that were quite stark learning curves for you or quite difficult to kind of grasp in the sense that there wasn't much experience? And as we all do, we have to start somewhere. But what were kind of some of those hard lessons to learn that in reflection you think have taught you some really good principles as you find yourself now where you are?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, dealing with when I got into the industry, I'd been doing like odd coaching jobs before, but I started my PGA apprenticeship at the age of 22. And that's kind of when I stepped into a bit more of a corporate environment, company environment at Zebula. And the first learning I took was just, how passionate owners can be about their asset. So whether they're developing property with the golf course, or whether it's a standalone golf club and it's owned by the members, I think any stakeholder, and especially an owner or a shareholder, is generally very passionate about their property. And I didn't always understand the negative side of that passion when it came out from the owner or shareholder. Being a youngster, it was my first exposure to a proper business environment. And that's always something that I've kept with me, is that the perspective of the guy just entering the company is to try and always treat them as fairly as possible and not presume that they have the understanding that I now have after 20 years of working in golf operations. So that was the first thing, is that it was a big wake-up call to try and absorb the passion of the owner there about his product. And then the second thing I think that was a big learning curve was customer service, because you go in with no customer service training at all. You're hired as someone, especially as an entry-level apprentice, who can play golf, who understands golf, but you don't necessarily understand the customer. So you're relying on your natural ability to interact with people. And at that stage, you've either got it or you don't have it. Some people are more emotionally intelligent than others. Some people understand what people want, and some just don't. Some are introverts, some are extroverts, and we're all different. And I think that was a big learning curve for me. Not that I particularly feel like I struggled with the customer service element, but I remember thinking at one point when I first got in was, why is there such a big emphasis on customer service in this place? I couldn't understand why people would not want to serve their customers well, but at the same time, why the company placed so much emphasis on it, why the PGA placed so much emphasis on it, because I came in blind. It was one of the points that stuck with me. I particularly remember thinking, why this big emphasis on customer service? And it was only after getting, my feet wet, kind of after a few years, realizing, okay, well, this is what it's all about. This is what leaders should be doing in the golf industry, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, when you come in as a youngster, there's so much to learn.
A quick break to check in with our sponsor for this interview, RCA Consulting. RCA have been doing work in the learning and development space for the last 12 years, working with a range of different types of companies and organizations to facilitate the enhancement of their organizational culture through blended learning and performance management. To get a free needs analysis for your organization, go over to rcaconsulting.biz to find out more. Without further ado, back to the episode. And I think, those are two really important points you brought up there. I kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit further into that one answer that you gave around some people are naturally more empathically wired, I suppose, or have a natural high degree of emotional intelligence. In your opinion, how much of that can you teach and how much of it is just natural wiring? I mean, where do you net out on that sort of spectrum?
We are all who we are. I don't think you can necessarily change someone's personality, but I think you can bring the best out of them. And very often, when someone is shy, they might have had negative experiences leading up to that point. But if you are someone as a manager or leader who encourages them, builds them up, and tries to bring the best out of them, very often you can bring someone who is seemingly an introvert, and you bring that personality out of them. So I think it's kind of the nature nurture argument, and it is a bit of both, no doubt. Some people are naturally gregarious, natural sales people, and no matter how much training you give someone, they might not be as outspoken as the next. But in terms of service, for example, I recently came back to South Africa for a family holiday, and one of the hotels that we stayed at was the Protea Fire and Ice at Umhlanga. And each person there had very different personalities. Some came across a little bit stronger than others, but they were so similar in terms of the service standards, and the service was excellent. And it's not a 5-star property, but they'd all been trained so well that I never noticed the personality differences. And I think that's one of the tricks of the hospitality industry, is that you got to almost pretend that you're in a production. So when you clock in the morning, the curtains open, the spotlight is on you, and you've got to put on a performance sometimes. And it's how well we can sometimes put on that performance that determines the success of our service.
Yeah, Jonno, I can't agree with you more here. I think there's an element of theatre definitely in the approach, because it isn't, I suppose, a completely natural dynamic. It is somewhat, I suppose, staged to a certain extent. But I also think, and I wanted to get your impression on this, is that you've had the benefit of seeing a few different environments now, from Zabula days all the way through to now in Mauritius, and obviously been under different managers, different leaders, and within different environments. I would have thought that you would have naturally latched onto some of those more so than others. Can you maybe speak to us a little bit about what you've noticed about the differences in culture when it comes to those environments that you've been exposed to, and how culture plays a role in, I suppose, us getting the best out of our staff, or us getting the best out of ourselves if we're that staff member being in in those different spaces?
Yeah, sure. I think at the end of the day, at our base level, we're all people with basic needs, and what I have always fallen back on is to treat people with care. So whether it's the customer or the staff member, because I honestly don't believe you can bring the best out of someone by treating them badly. And it's something that I've had to learn, because often as managers, especially a young manager, you are at times out of your depth. You're still learning yourself, and then you're expected to lead a team of people who are looking at you for that leadership. And perhaps out of being a bit naive, my experience has been that I have personally said and done things that I look back now as a more mature leader, and I look back and think, well, I could have done that a bit better, or I could have done it a different way. But you don't know what you don't know. And that's where I've got a lot of respect for people who have shown consistency in the industry. If I look at someone like Jeff Claus, for example, even though I've never worked for Jeff, I can draw principles from him. If I look at his reputation in the industry, I think it speaks for itself, which says something about how he treats people. I could say the same, for example, about Chris Bentley at Rand Park, at Royal Johannesburg. These are the kinds of people that are making a name for themselves in the industry, and I think it's because of the way they treat their customers, but also the way they treat their staff. And then personally for me, I've had some good bosses and I've had some bad bosses, and I've looked at various aspects of their personalities, and no one's perfect. So I've always tried to draw the good from what I've learned from each person that I've worked with and for, and then inculcate that into the way I lead. And what's given me a great perspective is getting international experience, because I think when you are cocooned in a society, you only know that society, and you only know the culture and the character traits of that society. So if there is a better way of doing things, you don't necessarily know about it unless you're trained by, let's say, an international expert, or you get some sort of international exposure. And that's where I feel really lucky to be in the position that I am now, and that I've had a French boss, and I've now got a Mauritian boss. So I'm learning from all these different cultures all the time, and there are definitely positives that I've drawn from each of them, and the different leadership styles that come with all the different cultures.
Mm. Yeah, and you strike me as the kind of person who's very, I guess, very observant, very open to seeing how these things differ, or how these approaches differ. Rather, you mentioned the differences in leaders that you've had. And as you alluded to as well, as the fact that you've had, I guess, that South African context as well as the Mauritian context. I would have thought putting you very much out of your comfort zone in the initial move across there, and the different societal norms and cultures there. Can you maybe elaborate on how different it was in the beginning and what the sort of challenges are? Because I think principally, regardless of what environment you go into, I think one's approach, there's a lot to learn from that. So I'd be very interested to kind of go into some of the specifics around what it was like in those early first couple of months in the new space.
Yeah, it was really it's a typically South African way of describing things, but hectic. To give you a bit of background, I just registered with UNISA to study a Bachelor of Commerce in Financial Management 4 months before I got the job. And I promised myself that I'd finish my degree. And then we found out that a few months prior to that, my wife was pregnant. So we were just about to have our first child, and we had just bought our first house together, all in 2015. And then within the space of a month, to have to drop all of those plans and move over was a shock to the system. So I came over first without my wife and my son. But they came over pretty soon afterwards. My son was 3 weeks old when he and my wife flew over. So we had a 3-month-old baby living in an old sugarcane house in a foreign country, with none of our own furniture, basically just our suitcases that we came over with. And it was difficult because it's a very different culture to South Africa. The people are extremely friendly, extremely welcoming. I honestly cannot say that I felt unwelcome at that time. If I asked for anything, I had help. But where it was a struggle is the simple things, like how do I get to the shop? How do I get to the office where I need to register as an expat worker in Mauritius? How many times do I need to go back to that office? And in South Africa, we do come with high expectations, I think, because, whatever you say about South Africa, there are things that work really well. And when, for example, in a different country like Mauritius, where they're very much more paper-based than digital, and you got to go back 3 or 4 times to get a process completed, that's something that's quite different. And our culture in South Africa, we are very friendly people. When I came back recently, I was absolutely blown away with how friendly everyone was and welcoming, etc. But as I mentioned earlier, we are also very demanding, and we voice our complaints, and we're not scared to be forthright and forthcoming with those complaints, and a bit hard. And that doesn't work in the Mauritian culture at all. My experience is that you have to tone it down. You have to be a part of the culture here. You absolutely cannot come and try and impose your culture on another country. That's been my experience in Mauritius. And I've loved learning from the Mauritian people and adopting the way they do things that could be of benefit to me. And I think through that, I've learned how to interact with the various cultures that you have in Mauritius. And South Africa is also very multicultural, but I think Mauritius equally so. The people here are really great, very, very friendly, a softer culture than the South African culture. And I've enjoyed learning about how to emotionally engage with that and to make that part of who I am now.
It's super interesting the way you've explained that. And I wanted to ask, when you say that they don't respond, I guess, to, I suppose, a very prescriptive kind of, FIFO kind of approach, have you found yourself kind of being a bit more democratic in the way that you engage with them? Have you found yourself kind of making sure that they come along because they want to? Is that the kind of dynamic, I guess, that is more apparent there?
Definitely. And, it's even for the leader's own comfort, I would say, because you honestly will not get to the end goal by being too prescriptive. There are obviously instances, I think, in any business where a little bit of prescription comes in, but it's how you do it, and explaining the why we are going down this road. But I think it's a well-known leadership principle in that trying to bring people along with you on whatever journey you're on and whatever vision you have for your business is a lot more effective than saying, I want X, Y, and Z, especially as an employee. If you own the land or if you own the business or the building or whatever it might be, it's perhaps a little easier to be prescriptive. But when you're also an employee, I think the mistake that I've seen is that managers at golf clubs tend to, just to keep the wording simple, it's become maybe a slightly big-headed, and to call it my course, my team, my whatever. I don't really think that's the appropriate wording. I definitely think it's more effective to say our course and working together. And certainly in a Mauritian context, definitely more effective.
Just taking a few steps back, do you think with those leaders and managers that you worked under historically, do you feel that you were more connected to those who kind of adopted that approach where it's more about getting people to come along with you because you want to do it, not because they want you to do it? Do you think that's fair and accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah, and especially for one's longevity at the club. Yes, your leader can be prescriptive, but you're going to be looking elsewhere in a pretty short space of time, because I don't think it's the natural way to live life. And the mistake that I believe companies make is forgetting that they're dealing with people who are highly emotional beings. And by not acknowledging that side of people and being too prescriptive, I think it creates an environment that could be conducive to achieving short-term goals, achieving things quickly, but the mid-term to long-term vision, I think, could suffer as a result of being too prescriptive and too bossy. And I've got some examples in mind which I won't share, but I've kind of seen it. And yeah, like I say, I mean, I'll point the finger straight back at myself. As a younger manager, there were times when I was too prescriptive, and it's definitely something that I've had to unlearn and learn how to emotionally engage on a deeper level with staff to bring them on a journey.
Do you think that as an individual you're quite conscious of previous actions, like you've just mentioned, like quite naturally reflective of how you dealt with a certain situation and try and be mindful of that in terms of facing that or a similar situation in the future? Do you feel that's sort of part of your personality?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly I'm not perfect at it, but I like to think that I do reflect maybe on the moments where I didn't live up to the expectations of what a good leader is, and even go back to people and say, look, I didn't handle that correctly. I'm sorry about that. This is what I meant, and this is why I said it. And would you come along with me, even though I didn't do it? I didn't say it right the first time. It's like I found that as long as you drop the ego and just give a good solid why as to your requests, it happens a lot easier. So reflection does help with that.
It's definitely, I think, becoming more accepted that even the best of the best out there from a leadership point of view are quite comfortable with the fact that they don't know everything, that they're not meant to know everything, that they have vulnerabilities and areas where they're not the strongest, and that's okay. People still follow that kind of person more because of the fact that they are at ease with that, rather than the fact that they try and hide it. And I suppose it allows you to connect more with that person on a like you said earlier, on a more human level. But I think one of the things, and you mentioned the word there, unlearning as well, is being willing to adapt and move with the times, which I think the club industry is very much in the space of now, as so many things change. What's your philosophy from a club perspective on things like, I guess, education and I guess getting people into some kind of a growth culture or growth phase, so that they don't stagnate, they don't get into a rut? And I guess some positions are tough because the nature of the job is very repetitive. But at the same time, you want to try and create an environment where people are stimulated with new information. What's been your approach, whether it be in-house or outsourced or whatever the case might be, to kind of solving for that challenge on an ongoing basis?
I think the first step for me is understanding what the individual's goals are. Because I've had both sides of the coin. I've had employees, generally who may be slightly older, who are very comfortable in their positions, and they just want to do a good job where they're at, and they're very good at it, and they don't necessarily want the pressure of learning, growing. They're happy where they are, and so with those kind of people, it's important to also understand where they're at and not to force the issue, because we can tend to, because we always want to do better, grow more, get more, and so you've got that kind of, it is admittedly the minority by a long way, but you've got that kind of person. And then most of your guys are looking for a bit of growth. Some people more apprehensive than others, but I've always preferred to take the individual approach and keep an open door policy to say, okay, let's have a coffee together, come to my office, let's have a chat, because I'd like to understand where you're at and what your goals are and how we can make that work with where the company is at the moment and move you on the career path that you want, so that there's like a dual benefit to the individual and to the company. So again, rather than being prescriptive and saying, okay, this is how I would like to structure things, and this is where you are going to go, et cetera, and these are the educational courses that you will do. Obviously there's the foundation that you need to lay. So if you're talking to your food and beverage team, it's obvious that the training for the most part is going to be within the food and beverage space. But there's definitely also space for, again, emotional intelligence training or well-being training or whatever it might be, so that they at least feel, that they are growing as people as well.
I really enjoy that. Sorry to jump in, but I really enjoy that approach, because I think it really does empower the individual to feel, again, like you've alluded to, that it's less prescriptive and it's more on their own terms, which I think increases the degree of motivation to actually want to do it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been surprised when I've spoken to people on what I think would be good for them and what they think would be good for them. And then it's kind of trying to marry, whether it be the training budget that you've got and the available training courses that a provider can provide, and then trying to marry your expectations and that of the person who's actually being trained. So there's all those different facets to try and take into account. But I think if you put the time and effort in, you usually get the output is usually a lot better than just putting someone on a 2-day course, for example, that they're going to forget next month.
Yeah, so true. I think inherently, I guess it's more work on the part of someone like yourself being the leader to take the more one-on-one individual approach. But I think as you just alluded to there, your return on that effort is so much greater when I think they feel like it's been curated, I suppose, for their needs rather than the needs of the collective.
Yeah, exactly. As I say, there are practical needs. So there will be a collective training plan, let's say, but I think there should always be space for the individual, and it will definitely engage them more.
I also just wanted to take a bit of time to touch on, you're involved in a very cool new project within the space that you work in. You've put yourself in the deep end again by learning a whole new skill set, pretty much, in terms of the new course developments. I'd love to just hear your views and what that's been like to, again, be in a very sort of unfamiliar space.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fantastic, to be honest with you. It's a really exciting project. So just to give a bit of background, we're building a second golf course, which is a link style course, which we are trying to position in the top 100 in the world. It's been co-designed by Peter Matkovich and Louis Oosthuizen. We've launched a really exclusive membership, and the way the course will run is that it will be only members, accompanied members, guests, and Heritage Resorts guests that can play on the course. So it's been a really, from the ground up, kind of experience for me. I remember first coming into the position, and the CEO at the time said to me, okay, well, where's your financial model for the second course? And, I'd literally just walked in the door. So it was a lot of interesting learning to go through. So we built the business model and the financial model for the course based on the vision of the owners of the land and of the company. And it was very interesting to go through that process and to watch how Peter, for example, negotiated with the owners on the piece of land that he would get and how many designs it actually takes to get a golf course going. Obviously, I've had tender experience before, but going through all of the tenders. And then obviously we had COVID. So we were building a new golf course through COVID, which was interesting. But probably the most enjoyable part for me so far has been designing a new membership that we've never had before in Mauritius. So I took some of my learning from the River Club, the private aspect of the River Club, some of my learning from Pinnacle Point, where in the early days there we had the platinum membership. So I took some of those elements and put them all in a melting pot. And yeah, we've done really well with our membership sales because memberships in Mauritius are still viewed as an appreciating asset. So they have value and they grow in value over time. So people buy into golf clubs to enjoy the golf on the one hand, but to invest on the other hand. So that's been a really interesting aspect to design a membership that needs to have value for the long term. So we're at the point now with the course where we're working with a professional communications and PR agency called Landmark in the UK, and they are helping us along the way to positioning the course as a top 100 in the world golf course. And the level of detail that you need to go to get that right is quite amazing in terms of your communication, and it needs to be so spot on. So it's been an experience from golf course design, business modeling, PR and communication and marketing, memberships, obviously growing in the course itself, getting the buildings done, so the clubhouse design, etc. And then, of course, we're building up to the opening of the golf course as well. So that'll be another phase of enjoyment.
Jeepers, Jonno, it sounds hell of exciting. I'm sure you can't wait to see the finished product, because I suppose it's quite a journey to get to that point. How do you guys find out more about the developments and what's happening, and I suppose the value proposition there? Is there a website or anything the guys can go look at?
Yeah, so we're almost at the launch phase of our new website for the La Reserve Golf links. It's going to be Heritage Golf Club branded, but we'll have 2 golf courses that fall under that brand. So Heritage Golf Club is the mother brand, let's say. And then we've got the Le Chateau Golf Course, which is the current one, where the DP World Tour event takes place. And then we'll have the La Reserve Golf Links, which will be the other one. And because it's still kind of in its infancy, we're getting together some good imaging, first CGI, and then natural imaging. But the website will be able to use the CGI, and that'll be launched within the next couple of months. So I would say around June, we'd be able to give guys a reference point to go to and start learning more about the course. But it really is, and I'm not just saying it because I'm working here. I had the same sort of dramatic feeling when I saw Pinnacle Point. So it's that kind of drama with a links style golf course.
Well, I think any golf fan is probably chomping at the bit to see what the finished product's going to look like. I'm sure it'll be absolutely exceptional with the likes of yourself and Peter and everyone else involved. So I wish you everything of the best in that as the runway kind of comes to a finish and setting that up. And I also just wanted to move on before we start to finish off. What we like to do towards the end of our interviews is a few quick fire questions, just to pick your brain on a few, I suppose, more golf specific questions. I know you are obviously a golf fan like myself, so you should roll off the tongue pretty pretty easily, I would have thought. So I'm just going to fire away with them, and you give me your your instinctive answer, if I can put it that way. So
Perfect.
I'll start with the first one. Next South African to win a major.
Tough one. Wilco Nienaber.
I really, really like that answer. You can only play one or the other for the rest of your life, Parkland or Lynx.
Definitely Lynx.
Easy answer given where the focus is at the moment. Mr. Jeff Claus will also love that answer. The most impactful or influential golf course, in your opinion, in the world?
Obviously, it's a toss-up between St. Andrews and Augusta, but I'd have to say, given the modern balance of power and what they're trying to do in Asia, I'd go with Augusta.
Okay. If you were still playing professional golf, if you could either win the Masters or win the Open, which one would you choose?
Sorry to my British heritage, but I'd go for the Masters.
I suppose that green jacket is very, very appealing, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can either drive it like Bryson or putt it like Faxon.
Definitely putt it like Faxon. Yeah, that's where the money's made.
That's the intelligence coming out there. In your opinion, who's the GOAT, Tiger or Jack?
Tiger.
Well, the best run tournament you've ever played in or been a part of or attended?
The Masters.
Fair comment. Your all-time four-ball, including yourself, can be dead or alive.
Be myself, my best mate, John T. Heathcote. I think you need to enjoy it with someone that you know, and I know he'd appreciate us probably more than I would. And then I'd go for Tiger. I'm always stuck between Bobby Jones and Jack Nicklaus. Just for something different, I'll go Bobby Jones. So Tiger, Bobby Jones, myself, and John T.
I'll tell you what, I think John T would be pretty quick to give you a response to that invite.
Yeah.
Awesome, John. I think those answers speak perfectly to your personality. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of conclude and say thank you so much for your time. First of all, I think you're a great example of a South African chap who's done great things beyond South Africa, which is, I think, what we all look up to and aspire to.
Cool. Thanks, man.
And I think what's also interesting is, the way I perceive you is you're not necessarily the loudest person in the room, but you've done some pretty monumental things regardless. And I think there's a great lesson in that as well. So I really appreciate the consciousness behind the answers that you gave earlier, because I think it does speak to the fact that there's many more ways than one to skin the cat.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you get the loud guys who trump their way into things, but there's definitely space for the quieter, more thoughtful person, and there's definitely different ways to get through it all. That's for sure.